Well, good morning and welcome to another day of Bible study as we continue on through PartyOn, this book that we have been going through that is looking at all of the places in the Bible that deal with food and fellowship, which hopefully is a part of any of our food experiences. And also looking at the festivals in the Bible. We spent a whole week actually looking at Old Testament festivals, and we'll spend a few moments looking at them still yet in light of the New Testament as we work through the end of this study. And really what we found along the way is that the table is central, food is central, and hospitality is central to the heartbeat of God and to what his expectations are for anyone who would be a follower of his. And so I'm glad to have you along for this journey. And I want to say, before we get into today's text, that if you are in Northeast Ohio and you are watching this anytime relatively close to when it airs, that this Sunday on June 27th, Sally and the kids, myself, we're all going to be in Northeast Ohio in Cleveland, and we would love to have you a part of an in-person gathering. I know it's summer and everybody's schedules are a little bit crazy, and some of you just enjoy the online thing, and that's absolutely okay. No one's going to twist your arm to come to an in-person gathering, but we'd love to see you, love to meet you. I know that many people up there, it'll be a bit of a reunion because we lived in Cleveland for a few years. We also have a lot of new faces and people who are part of this Christ Table ministry, and we'd love to invite you to come out and just hang out for about an hour. There'll be food there. We'll enjoy some table fellowship. There'll be Maggie actually is going to be there as well, live and in person, so you'll get to meet Maggie for the first time in person if you're with us on Sunday mornings. You know, she does the music. And so we'll be in Willoughby, Ohio at the Euclid Avenue Pool Pavilion, which is right there on the main drag in Willoughby, and would love for you to be a part of that. And all of this is brought to you thanks to the generosity of all of those generous people who choose to tithe or donate to ChristTable.today. And you can do that by going to our website, find out more about us, sign up for our email list at ChristTable.today. And like I said, all of that, the in-person gatherings, this Bible study, all of those things and resources are only because of their generosity. If so, we wouldn't be able to do any of that. So we'd love to encourage you to consider making us a part of your generosity whenever you are thinking about where you spend your money. And so today, though, we have the privilege of being in what may be one of the most famous stories, if not the most famous story in Scripture, maybe apart from the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus or David and Goliath. But the prodigal son may even exceed, but at the least meet the popularity and the broadly known and understood level of those passages. And so I find, interestingly, that whenever I come to the story of the prodigal son in Luke chapter 15, which is where we are today, I find that whenever we come to the story of Luke chapter 15, that I always seem to find something new in the story of the prodigal son. There's so many different angles to look at that story from: the angle of the son, the angle of the father. There also, oftentimes we miss the older brother and look at it from his angle. And in fact, honestly, I think, and I've maybe said this before in the past, that when you look at the story of the prodigal son, I actually think the prodigal son isn't necessarily the younger son who ran away. I think that actually the older son in the story is the prodigal son, that we've misunderstood who it is. But that's a whole other thing for a whole other day. But I'll tell you that whenever I looked at this passage in light of this study about food and about partying, it was like light bulbs were just going off everywhere in my mind, because I had never seen this story through the lens of food and the table. And I was shocked at how those things, food, the table, hospitality, play not only a central role, but maybe, I might even say, the central story and the central theme in the story of the prodigal son. So without any further delay, let's jump into Luke chapter 15, verses 11 to 32. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read the entire thing, so I would encourage you, if you've not already done so, in fact, maybe even hit pause right now, just read through the entire thing. But if you can't do that, we will cover the highlights here together, and I'll intersperse along the way a few thoughts about the table. So Jesus tells this story, and this is in a series of stories in which he is kind of making a similar point about lost things being found. And so this one, though, is the one that is the most memorable. A man had two sons. The younger son told his father, "I want you dead." Well, he didn't actually say that. He said, "I want my share of your estate now before you die," which in those days in ancient Near East culture is essentially saying, could you just divide out the inheritance now? You're only good to me in the fact that you have money, and I just kind of like my money now. We're not told why he does this. Maybe they didn't have a great relationship. Maybe the son was selfish. Maybe he was just tired of living under his father's thumb. Maybe it was the older brother. We don't know. But either way, his father agrees to divide his wealth between his sons, which essentially means the father kind of goes into retirement, gives the older son and the younger son all of their inheritance, which means all the property, all of the land, all of the livestock, everything. And so from this point on, the father is essentially subservient to the older son, because everything that he once owned and had is now his oldest son's. So the youngest son kind of gets to live how he wants because he doesn't have the burden of responsibility as the older son. So he can go and make merry, which is exactly what the younger son does. A few days later, the younger son packs everything that he owned. He moved to a distant land, which probably essentially means a non-Jewish territory. And there he wasted all of his money in wild living. We're later told essentially centered around prostitution. And so he kind of lived it up. He lived excessively. Jesus commentaries on this and says, that was a waste. What perhaps should he have spent his money on? Well, the text is quiet at this moment. About the time his money ran out, to add insult to injury, a great famine sweeps over the land, and he began to starve. There's our first indication about food being central to this, is that he's run out of money. A famine sweeps over the land. And so the great problem that he finds himself in, the struggle here, is food, is the ability to eat, to survive. So he persuades a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. Bacon and Jews don't necessarily mix. And so now he is not just financially demoralized, and he's not just resource demoralized in that he has no food, but now he's also morally demoralized by having to feed pigs when he has no food, but they do. The young man became so angry that even the pods that he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. Everybody was thinking about the pigs. No one was thinking about him, and no one gives him anything. I wonder how many people in our spheres or in our communities are suffering without anything and going unnoticed. Essentially here is saying that no one paid attention to him. But Jesus uses the table, he uses food and hospitality to point out that no one is paying attention to him. No one gives him anything. Our hospitality or lack thereof can mean life or death for others. Now, you may say it is his lack of food and his being at the bottom of the barrel that causes him to come to his senses. And without there being a lack of hospitality or lack of food, that would not have happened. And so it's okay if we remove hospitality or allow people to remain in their struggle, tough love, as I've heard it called, in order to get them to wake up. Okay, I can buy that. And that may well be the best case scenario here. It may have been a requirement, and it may be in other people's situations as well. But I don't know. I think I also may have to push back against that a little bit, because the way this story goes, that's not actually the way other people act in this story. His father doesn't leave him in tough love. And I might say too that maybe if someone had given him food, had built a relationship with him and learned what was going on in his life and encouraged him to not be a nuthead, maybe he would have come to his senses even sooner. The danger here is that because there is no influence in his life, the danger here is that he may not come to his senses at all, and he may die. So I always think hospitality over tough love is the greater and better path forward. Maybe there are exceptions to that, but even in the story of the prodigal son, I'm just not so sure. Let's keep going. So he finally comes to his senses. He says to himself, at home, and look at what he focuses on here. Look at what causes him to come to his senses. At home, the hired servants have food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger, so I will go home to my father. So he's going to go home. And what drives him back to home? The table. Food. So he begins rehearsing this speech, hoping that his father will, if not show him forgiveness, at least will show him mercy and allow him to be a servant in the household of his older brother, where he will have food. And it's fascinating to me that he says he's going to his father to do this when his father doesn't actually have any servants anymore. His father doesn't actually have the home anymore. It's the older brothers. The older brother owns all of this. But he's going back to the father. Fascinating. But either way, for those in need, it's the table that woos them home. And this is why I say what I do about tough love versus extravagant hospitality. It is the extravagant hospitality of his home that he remembers that draws him back. It's the table. For families that don't have extravagant hospitality, what will it be? Maybe nothing. That draws people back to your home, that draws your children back to you if they walk away. Obviously, Jesus is painting a spiritual picture here as well. And what is it that draws people back to God? For people who have walked away from faith, for people who have walked away from God, who have walked away from church, what is it that draws them back? It's not the music. It's not the preaching. It's not the opportunity to see other judgmental people tell you how to live your life. No, it's the hospitality. It's the love. It's the table that draws and woos people back to their faith, that draws and woos people back to their home, that draws and woos people back back to themselves. For those who are in need. It is the table, and I might suggest only the table, and all that goes with it, fellowship and hospitality and love and forgiveness that woos. So he heads back to his dad, and many of you will know the outcome of this story, but he heads back to his dad. He heads back home, and there's a very real danger that he will lose his life in doing this, because Jewish law essentially said that if this had been done, he could be stoned. He could lose his life. He could be capitally punished for doing this. And so in this beautiful picture, the father actually runs, which ancient Jewish men did not run. It was not a thing. It was considered to be uncool and disrespectful, dishonorable to run. But the father runs to give his son a bear hug. Doesn't even let him get out the whole speech that he had pulled together. That may be, and certainly was, because the father had been looking for the son and wanted to express immediately his love for his son. But it may well be that the father quickly ran to meet him and was looking for him day after day after day, because should he come home, the town folk may have taken it into their own hands, and his son may not have lived to see the love of the father. So the father running is both emotional, and it's also practical. But his father, interrupting the speech, says to the servants, "Quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger, sandals for his feet, and kill the calf that we've been fattening." There was always a calf that was being fattened for a special occasion. It may have been a special occasion for the older brother. It could have been for an upcoming wedding for him. Find the best meat that we have, slaughter it. We must celebrate this idiot. I inserted that with a feast. For this son of mine was dead and is now returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found. And I love this. Some of you have have perhaps bristled at the idea of labeling this partying. But here it is, right in Scripture. So the party began. I love that. So the party began. Quite an unexpected response. In the son's mind, he's probably still in shock and awe over this response from his father, that it didn't engender a rebuke. It didn't engender a slap on the face. It didn't engender a stoning from the townspeople led by his father and older brother, but instead what it brought was a party with the best food. I could preach for days on this one. Forgiveness is found at the table. Think about that for just a moment. Those times in your life where you have been at odds with a family member, maybe not been on the same page, where there was maybe a disconnect of time over something that perhaps had gotten in between you and someone else. And I think oftentimes what we will remember then about that person are the meals that we had afterwards. In fact, maybe the forgiveness or the coming back together to be of one heart or one mind came at the table. Think about the power of food and the table for forgiveness. You can say you've forgiven someone, but whenever you share the hospitality of your home of your table with him, that shows true forgiveness has happened. You can say, hey, I forgive you, we're good. But are you willing to invite them into your home for a meal? It's next level forgiveness. It's actually, I might even say, true forgiveness. Forgiveness is found at the table. Here in this scripture, forgiveness is found at the table, even still yet today. At your table is where forgiveness should be found and should be explored and should be offered. And I don't even need to go and talk about Jesus and the Last Supper and communion and the ongoing perpetual command for us to continue to remember Jesus, where at the table, where part of our liturgy even says that the cup is a reminder of the forgiveness of sins. Forgiveness is found at the table, and God has been modeling this method for us for now 2,000 years, not to mention all the time before Jesus in the Old Testament. He's been saying, if you want to find forgiveness for yourself, do so at the table and offer forgiveness to others at the table. Enough said. But back up though. So important. So important. But the older son is not a fan of the younger son's return. He's not a fan of where the younger son spent his money. It's not a fan of his younger brother receiving a huge party when this older brother, who has done everything right, obeyed all the rules, taken on all of the huge responsibility that were once his father's, but now are his because of his boneheaded, knuckleheaded younger brother, is not happy that there is a feast and a party of forgiveness happening now for this idiot in his mind. So pulls his father aside and says, when this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, he just comes right out and says what the money was spent on. Up until this time, they've kind of jumped around, used code and implication, but the older brother just, as is usual when we're in these situations, just calls a spade a spade. After squandering your money on prostitutes, what do, Dad? You celebrate by killing the fatted calf. And if you don't think this is about food or hospitality or the table as being the great forgiveness location, look at what he says. All of these years I have slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing that you told me. And in all that time, look at this. In all of that time, this is the thing that he's frustrated about. You never threw me a party. Not only did you not kill a fattened calf for me, but you never even gave me one young goat for a feast with my friends. Now, the story's about to end here, but there are a lot of things that are going to be unresolved in the story. My kids oftentimes hyperbole. I've done these things for them, but they don't remember it, or they don't want to remember it, because remembering the things that I have done for them in the way that I have done for their brothers or sisters it doesn't play into the narrative that they're wanting to create. So that may be what's going on here, is that the father has done these things for the older brother as well as the younger brother, but the older brother is spinning the narrative in his mind in a way that is not truthful about hospitality. He's deliberately ignoring the hospitality of the father that was also directed towards him, and the forgiveness that was also directed towards him. Or it may well be that here in this story, the father truly had shared the table and hospitality and food in an ongoing way with a younger son in a way that he had never offered or given the older son. I think there is power in this moment of now seeing the entire story of the prodigal son as one long story about the presence of hospitality and the table and fellowship, table fellowship and forgiveness, and what happens there, the dynamic in communities and families when it's present, and what happens when it's not there. It's the table, stupid. How many different times and ways does God have to continually remind us, even through stories that we think we know, like the prodigal? Do we still hear God shouting to us, "It's the table, stupid"? And if you've never seen The Prodigal Son, about the story of the table, when it is right there on display in living color all throughout the entirety of the story, how many other places have we totally and completely missed God's heart and completely and totally missed the story? You know, I said yesterday, and I'll close with this, in service, the first command of the Bible that God says to humans directly, do this, is he tells us to eat freely. And the final command that God says directly to humans, do this, he says, drink freely, eat freely, drink freely. And I didn't mention this in the sermon, but I was reminded that some of the greatest arguments that I've had as a minister, here going on in churches that I've been in, and one of the most ongoing things that is always a discussion has been over the decades in which I've been in ministry and as a pastor, is whether or not food should be brought into the sanctuary, into the auditorium. Those signs, no food or no drinks. For a God who said to us, eat freely and drink freely, we put up signs that say, please, no food or drinks in the worship space. We've completely and totally and utterly lost the story. It's the table, stupid. God continues to remind us. Here it is again. It's the table, stupid. For every prodigal, party on.